we've seen the Jews, and we're going to see the Jews, that at any mention of anything Gentile, what do? Fly into a rage, right? At the very thought that the Gentiles might be given the same chosen people status as them. And on the other side, we've seen it. We were just talking about Ephesus and what happens when the Gentiles see the Jews and other Gentiles turning away from their gods and turning towards Christ. They fly into a rage. They start a mob and they start a riot. And it's so funny because both sides need this, and yet both sides are so protective of what they have and what they think is their right that they're willing to be wrong about it. And it was kind of an interesting note. Neither side was able to admit where they've been wrong, which is a problem. It's a big thing, especially when you think about marriage and marriage counseling and anything else, or anybody asking for relationship advice online. What do I do about my partner that does this, and this? And first thing you got to say, well, you've got to look at it this way. Look at yourself and see if there's anything that you're doing that's causing any of those behaviors. Because if your spouse acts kind of disinterested in you, right, or just doesn't seem like they listen to what you say and things like that, are you doing anything that might cause that? Or are you just coming home and not making them feel appreciated so they act like they're not appreciated? Those kind of things. And so just to not be able to see how we're wrong it's a big thing for humans. And Paul here in the first chapter is going to shed a lot of light on that in the first few chapters. So Paul has completed nearly 3 years of work in Ephesus, in which the gospel was spread throughout all of Asia there. He was at the chiefest city of Asia as far as the Roman Empire was concerned, and so there's so much trade and so much traffic going through the city that he was able, by preaching the word there, to spread it throughout all of Asia, even places where he hadn't been before. And this is going to be a big thing, because where does Paul like to go when he goes on his missionary journeys? Does he like to stick around in the same old places that other people have been? He likes to go to new. That's his thing. He likes to go to places that the gospel hasn't been preached before and preach it. And so that was the thing. They were the first ones to go to the Gentiles in Asia. He was the first one to go over into Macedonia. But for this letter, he's not been to Rome yet. And so after the uproar ceased, after the riot in Ephesus, Paul sent for the disciples and exhorted them, took leave of them, and departed to go to Macedonia. And when he had gone through those parts and given them much exhortation, he came into Greece. And when he had spent 3 months there, a plot was laid against him by the Jews as he was about to set sail for Syria. And so he determined to return through Macedonia. Sounds like one of those plots you get out of a spy thriller movie. And maybe it was he learned that they were going to grab him at night and toss him overboard from the boat. And so he decided to return across land. And so as we look and we remember the route he took, he went down to Corinth, and instead of going straight back up, instead of sailing straight back across, he went back up and then sailed down and across. He went down to Miletus and across and then down to Jerusalem. And so it starts here. Paul, a servant of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle, separated unto the gospel of God, sanctified, some translations may put, because that is what it is, what the word means, is to be sanctified, to separate. Concerning his Son, Jesus Christ our Lord, which was made of the seed of David according to the flesh, and declared to be the Son of God with power according to the Spirit of holiness, by the resurrection from the dead, by whom we have received grace and apostleship for obedience to the faith amongst all nations for his name, among whom you are also the called of Jesus Christ. To all that are in Rome, beloved of God, called to be saints, grace be to you, and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. And so, despite the fact that Paul has never been there, the gospel has been spreading. But he's not only worried about the places he's been. He wants to help the brethren at Rome. He plans, as we'll talk later on, to go even further than that. He wants to visit new places, but he wants to go through Rome to help to strengthen because there is such a problem from the Jews and the Judaizers in the church. This was almost, as I said before, surely written from Corinth. And Paul, as we talked about, wrote 2 letters, and he wanted to give Corinth time to straighten up before he went. I will come to you soon if the Lord wills. Note it says before that, some are arrogant as though I were not coming to you. They claimed that he was all talk. In 2 Corinthians says, the 3rd time I am ready to come to you. But I'm afraid that I may come and find you not what I wish, which is, a church solid in the Word and doing correctly. He doesn't want to find quarreling and jealousy and anger and selfishness and those other things in the church. He fears that when I come again, he may be humbled by God before them. Because he had preached, he had preached the gospel there. He had, it basically kind of started the church there. And so, as he wrote before, you are my commendation, right? Your response to the gospel and you being a good and solid church, showing that first off, I taught you well and that I ensured that you had the tools you needed to succeed, and I brought spiritual people to God. And if I come and find that all of that is just falling apart with infighting, that's going to tell me that I was wrong. I did not do that well when I was with you the first time. And so it would be very humbling. Well, that's why he wrote to them, and he delayed slightly to go to them, because he didn't want to have to come and be, as far as the imagery goes, you don't want Dad to have to come home to be the bad guy, right? There's that was a thing I had when I was a kid. Just wait till your dad gets home. Instead of the mom doing the punishment, he says, let Dad do it. But he didn't want to do that. He wanted to come to them and be able to build, not to punish or to discipline or any of that stuff. They needed to have that stuff sorted out because they needed to be able to do it on their own anyways. They needed to have the wisdom to do it on their own anyways. And if they needed him to come back to straighten things out every time, were they ever going to be able to exist as a church by themselves? No. And so he plans to go on from Corinth after he's come there. And he writes to the saints in Rome. Now, technically, you might say they were already in Rome, right? But this time, this is the Roman Empire, give or take. It had reached a very long way. And so, technically, all the saints were in Rome, but he's talking specifically, of course, about Rome and Italy. And so, there is a large portion of the empire that he wants to go and to see. And there are these, Rome, if you think about it, if you remember, we've had empires before. You had Assyria right here, and then it spread out more when Babylon took over, and had about this much. And then it spread out some more as into Persia. And then the Greeks spread it over here. And now you have Rome. And how in the world does Rome control so much when everybody else had so much trouble with it? That was pretty simple. They were organized. One thing about the place I work is we still fit under the definition of a small business, which is less than 50 employees. We've never had 50 employees. I think the closest we've ever gotten is 42. Part of that is you have to, in order to move up to the medium business size, you have to hire people whose job it is to do administrative things only. You know, there's for when we had 15 people, it didn't matter who worked there. Everybody had to be able to answer the phone and go help customers out because there weren't enough people for all the customers that were calling. But eventually, you have to have somebody that sits there and their only job is to do the administrative stuff, to count the inventory, to order parts, to organize things, to do payroll, to do checks and all that other things. Because otherwise, they don't get done. And when they don't get done, you can't keep the business going up enough. And so in order to make the jump up, you've got to invest a lot of money in organization. This was something that we've had a couple of people be really good at throughout the Bible. You know, Joseph was a great organizer in how he organized things in Egypt. Solomon organized everything as far as the running of the kingdom goes. David actually was a good organizer because he organized how the Levites were set up in their rotation for the things that they did in service to at the time of the tabernacle. And he saw that they would need to have that kind of organization to take care of the temple once it got built. And so he organized all that. And so you need organization. And you need people to be able to get from one place to the other. And, you know, of course, the thing of the legend here are the Roman roads. Rome invested a lot of money in roads. And this is part of the thing that is going to, probably next quarter, where we'll get into that study. I won't be teaching that one, but the biggest thing that one of the biggest things that starts the issues between the Romans and the Jews are the taxes. You know, the tax collectors are probably amongst the most hated people by the Jews because it is a constant reminder that they're under Rome. Well, Rome taxed to pay for their buildings and their building supplies and things like that, and they did really well on their roads. They built drainage into them. This isn't just, this ain't just the county spraying in a little bit of filler to fill in potholes. If they had problems, they fixed them. They fixed them properly because they were planning for long term. Nobody in Rome, part of their rules for doing things like this is nobody built things that were supposed to be temporary. And building projects used to take a long time. There used to be, I think, there were several cathedrals, it might be Notre Dame, but it might not, in Europe that took 400 and 500 years to build. To be able to build these large, impressive things, you had to plan for something. You had to be able to plan for something that was going to be going on well past the time that you were gone. And of course, the saying goes, all roads lead to Rome. That's because they started in Rome and worked their way out. And as they conquered, and as they improved, and as they got more places under their control, they built a road to it. And you want to talk about the way to move an army? Instead of having to go, if they had to have a fight over in Asia, or they had a problem over in Persia, it takes a lot less time to go somewhere by road than it does to go cross country. Roads on a road, even now, think about it. If you were going to go off-road in a truck, how fast are you going to go? 10, 15, 20 miles an hour? How fast are you going to go even on the worst road? 35? roads increase the rate of travel by 2 to 3 times, easily, and even more in some cases. It depends on, a person can only walk so fast, but you can walk twice as fast just walking on a road versus walking off-road. Pulling a horse, pulling a wagon can go 3 or 4 times as fast. And so that was what really helped increase trade and everything else and money was the roads. That allowed them to pay their armies and to expand their influence. And so, of course, the empire had their capital city. It was built on 7 hills next to the Tiber River, and they had Rome is one of those cities that they've got everything, all kinds of interesting landmarks. They've got the Colosseum, although it wasn't actually the Colosseum at this time. It's probably one of the most recognizable things in the modern world, but it wasn't around here. It was at the end of Paul's time, right around the time that he was executed. It was Nero's Golden House. Now this was the butt of jokes for so long. This is the most outstanding example of just how important he thought he was, right? So there was a big fire, of course, in Rome in 64. It was gigantic. It burned a lot of stuff. It was probably all the way up till the 20th century, fire was the greatest danger to cities because we just didn't have the ways to move enough water to fight them once they started getting out of control. And so it consumed a large portion of Rome. And so once he started building it, he just kept building and kept building and kept building. And so the same became. Rome is becoming a house. Migrate to Veii, which is a city down the road, Romans, unless the house takes over that as well. It was at its greatest around 300,000 square feet. It was huge. It had a drainable artificial lake. It had a Colossus Neronis, a 120-foot high bronze statue that Nero placed outside the entrance of Nero. And so after Nero's suicide in 68, the lake was drained and turned into the Colosseum. And it was called the Colosseum because of the statue out front. And they changed the name of it from Nero to Helios to honor the sun god because they didn't want anybody honoring Nero for anything. The funny thing about that is because it was an easily drainable and refillable artificial lake, we hear most often about the gladiators and fighting animals and things, but they actually used to flood the Colosseum and have mock naval battles too. Really interesting thing. Another of the big landmarks in Rome was the Circus Maximus. It had 300,000 seats and was famous throughout the ancient world. And you think about that. That is a lot. That is probably one of the biggest tracks with continuous seating around it in the entire world, even into today. It was primarily used for horse racing, but it was used on occasion for hunts and mock battles. And probably, I forget his name. I should have looked it up this morning to refresh because I don't have a thing for old Roman names. But the richest athlete, even today, there's billionaire athletes, but as far as for wealth compared to everybody else, the richest athlete that ever lived was a Roman chariot racer that raced the Circus Maximus. I think they figured that the money he won from all of his riches wound up being like $10 billion worth today or something like that. He had more money than he knew what to do with at one point. And so this is not, just some small thing. This is, once again, there aren't many racetracks that would rival this in the world as far as seating. And it's still there, and you can still see it. And it doesn't look all that great today until you look and you realize, right here, that's a car. How long this thing is. This had amazing architecture. They had a lot of temples that were obviously dedicated to gods and goddesses and things. You can still see a shrine of the Temple of Vesta, and that is where we actually get the name for Vestavia Hills. That's what that little thing is. And so the influence of the Romans is, you can't state it enough. All of the planets are named after Roman gods. All of that, and so you get a lot of Greek and Roman names when it comes to astronomy and things like that. Well, the other thing that is notable about Rome is the cruelty of its people. There would be a point in time later on that the Christians would have to meet in the catacombs, because that was the only way that the only place they knew that they would not be found out and persecuted. And so Rome had, for a short while, a good history with the Christians, and then it turned into, for hundreds of years, the great persecuting power. Like I said at the beginning, the keynote, I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. For therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith. As it is written, the just shall live by faith. Paul goes on to talk about how he had not visited them before, but he wants to come to them. He wants to come to them so that he may be prospered by them. He wants to see them and impart some spiritual gift. He wants to be comforted in their faith. He wants to know that everything is going well there, that there are no worries there. I think this is one of those things that we have we lose more and more of these days. Paul didn't care where they were at. All of these people were his brothers. And it wasn't, this is all he spent his time on. He spent his time in meditation on the Word, in writing letters to the brethren, and in teaching. That's it. He worked when he had to as a tent maker. But other than that, all of his free time was dedicated to thought about brethren everywhere. He was hindered from coming to them. I think plans and possibilities. I think perhaps now he wanted to go there, but instead knew that he needed that since he had accepted from other various places travelers with him that were going to take money to the saints at Jerusalem, that he did not need to go to Rome now. He needed to take the money to Jerusalem. I think that's one of the things that's hindered him. But now, having no more place in these regions, and having these many years longing to come to you, when I go to Spain, for I hope to see you in my journey, and be brought on my way thitherward by you, if first in some measure I shall have been satisfied with your company. But now I am going to go to Jerusalem, ministering to the saints. When I have accomplished this and sealed to them this fruit, I will come by you to Spain, and know that when I come to you, I shall come in the fullness of the blessing of Christ. Here is Paul's plan. Paul plans to go to Rome and then on to other places. And Interestingly enough, we know Paul will go to Rome. So he talks about, and these two notes here go hand in hand. First, he talks about the sinful condition of the Gentile world. And this sounds familiar because we see it all the time, right? Verse 18, the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness. I think a better translation might be they cover the truth. I think the thought of this is like you're holding something down, and so perhaps you push something underwater so that it can fill with water. Well, this is keeping the truth down, pushing it and masking it with that unrighteousness. They don't want to see it, to know it, and so they put it behind this. Because that which is known of God is manifest in them, for God has showed it to them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because that when they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, neither were they thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds, and four-footed beasts, and creeping things. This is the problem with the Gentile world, right here. This is where you get, under the old law, you still get people that maybe they were approved of God here and there, like Methuselah and such, or when you read in the New Testament and you read about folks like the centurions or Cornelius that believed in God. Everybody knows there's something. Except for there's the growing people today, they believe in nothing, but everybody that believes in something, the something is behind everything, that's God. But instead of looking for something better, right? Because that's what God is. God is better, 100%. Instead of looking for that, they decided that they would fashion first out of mud, and then out of wood, and then out of stone and metal, little figurines, and say, okay, this is God. And if I make it, it can't be what created me. It's not how it works. If it originated in front of me, I'm already here. It's not what created me. And it is insulting to God, so insulting, to bring him down to that level. And that is the sin of the Gentile world. And they became vain in their imaginations. And professing themselves wise, they became fools. That is all of those that deny the one true God. And whether it was those that sacrificed to all the different gods because of whatever they thought it was what they needed for good crops or anything else, or even those today that say it was nothing but a huge accident. All of that diminishes in their eyes the glory and power of God. And so what does God do? God gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts to dishonor themselves. Why? Because they changed the truth of God into a lie and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator. Why does God allow people to go off and to do those things and everything else? Well, he allows free will. He wants people to choose him. And there are people that, when clearly confronted with the choice, what should I believe? What do? They reject him. And this above all things is the thing that attacks our young ones today. Above all other things, this is what attacks our young people. They'll hear it from other students and some teachers at school. They'll hear it from the world. They'll hear it from every side. They'll hear it from all kinds of science textbooks and everything else to diminish God. And if you look at the root cause and all of those things, why don't people want to follow God? What always comes up? What do you find? They wanted their sin, right? That's it. They wanted to do these things, but if they do these things, then they can't follow God because otherwise those things would be wrong. And so which one did they choose? They chose the lust of their flesh. Maybe not specifically the sexual type lust, but all the other kinds of things. You know? The lust of their eyes after gold and money and greed and everything else. And so God gave them up. He said, go, you can go, just go ahead. He rejected them, didn't want them, and let them do what they wanted. Or the expression, gave themselves enough rope to hang themselves with. Well, that's it. If they don't want his help, he is just going to let them go and let them believe what they want to believe and let them do what they want to do, and they will see in the end what all that comes to. And that is what has happened to the Gentile world. And they've done everything. And you know, there are a lot of people that say, well, homosexuality is not condemned in the Bible. Really? Let's see. God gave them up to vile affections, for their women changed the natural use into that which is against nature. And the men left the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust towards one another, men with men working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that of their error that was meet or fitting. They didn't want to retain God in their knowledge, and God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient. And so they're filled with things, with all unrighteousness, with fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful, who knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in those that do them. And that sums up the world in one set of verses, doesn't it? All of those things are going on today. And so you've got that one side as the world was divided religiously into Jew and Gentile. Well, the problem is not that the Gentiles are bad. That is what the Jews stand on. The Gentiles are bad and they're without God and we have God. Well, that's not the problem, right? The problem with the Jews is that they chose to do the same things. The Jews are even worse because they had all the advantages, right? They were told the answers to the test ahead of time and still failed. Like, how do you do that? Well, you follow what you want to do. You ever try to teach somebody to do something and it requires just being very careful in this, in some certain thing, and so you tell them, hey, if you'll do it this way, do it like this will work. But they're like, well, I kind of feel like I can do it this way and get the same result. That's happened to me where I thought I could do a good job with a Dremel tool at removing a layer of paint from something versus just using the sander. Like, yeah, but the sander takes a long time to get down through all the layers of this, and that Dremel tool removes it all in one layer. It was a round ball on an antique bed. And so when all the paint's gone off of it real fast. Feel it. You can feel the ridges, around the whole thing, where I'd sat there and dug in too deep in some spots, another with the Dremel tool. And so he hands me the sander and says, now go back over it till it's smooth. And you wind up having to do it the right way to begin with. Welcome to the Jews. This is what they did. God told them all the things they needed to do, and they decided that they wanted to do the opposite anyways. And this is why they went into captivity. And here they've come back, and they still are not listening to God. And that's the problem. The Jews do all these same things, and they feel like they're superior to the Gentiles, but in God's eyes, they look the same. They look the same. And so everybody needs the same thing. Everybody needs the same thing. They need Jesus. Nobody can hold their nose up at anybody else and say, I'm better, because all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. That's it. Didn't matter if they were Jew or Gentile. And the thing is, it's an action thing. You know? Your faith has to be an actionable faith. He gives them the example of Abraham. Now, he's talking to people that would, in Rome, likely you've got a, right now, it would be a Gentile-based church because, for a while, all of the Jews were expelled from Rome. And so there might not have been as many moved back or back in the church. And so these are Jewish, or not Jewish people. They're more Gentile, but Paul shows them the way with Abraham, who is, a Jewish figure, but he was before the law. So it kind of works as a really good example to both sides on that. Well, what did Abraham do? What justified Abraham in God's eyes? He believed him. He had faith in it. And that's what it says in verse 3 of chapter 4. What says the Scriptures? Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him for righteousness. And if you believe God, you will follow what God says. You will obey what God says, and you will do those things. And that's the point. That is where, the Jews fell short. The Gentiles fell short, and they, you might imagine the situation Abraham's in, whereas God comes and says, Abraham, and instead of saying, I'm here, Lord, what is it? Abraham just ignores him and keeps doing what he wants to do. And then the Jews would be the ones that said, I'm here, Lord, and and the Lord says, well, go to Canaan. And they go, they look, and they say, well, I don't know that I like Canaan too much. Let's go back to Ur so I can live in a house instead of a tent. And so you see, he's getting into the, as he says, he's splitting it up to where nobody is right, and they're getting into the point where he's explaining the solution. And this is all kind of a way to prevent the same issues that have been happening other places coming in there. That's all the time we've got this morning. We'll pick back up there Wednesday, Lord willing.